Hey everyone, today we are looking into Dona Maria, the first Queen Regnant of the Kingdom of Portugal and the first monarch of Brazil. During her long reign, both Portugal and Maria I went through varying fortunes, yet as time passed, the Queen began to suffer from mental illness, which is why she is often known as Maria the Mad. This is her story. Dona Maria was born on the 17th of December 1734 in the Ribeira Palace in Lisbon in Portugal. She was the eldest of 4 daughters of the heir designate to the crown of Portugal, Dom José, and his wife, Mariana Victoria. Her grandfather was King John V of Portugal. Maria's childhood was spent being raised within the formal court circles of the Portuguese royal family in Lisbon. She was provided with an advanced education for the time, which would have included literature, languages, study of the Greek and Roman classics, and Roman Catholic theology. In 1750, her father succeeded to the throne of Portugal as King José I. At this time, it was still possible that the king and his wife would have a son, but as the 1750s went on and Queen Mariana's childbearing years came to their end, it was increasingly evident that one of their daughters would eventually succeed King José as the first Queen Regnant of Portugal in the kingdom's long history. Maria would be that queen if she lived longer than her father. On the 1st of November 1755, when Maria was 20 years of age, one of the most shocking events in Portuguese history occurred. That morning, a vicious earthquake struck the city of Lisbon. Measuring approximately 7.7 on the Richter scale, the quake's epicenter lay about 200 kilometers off the southwest coast of Portugal, but its worst effects were felt in the Portuguese capital, a densely populated city which was first hit by a massive tsunami created by the earthquake and was then ravaged by firestorms and aftershocks for hours afterwards. The death toll was huge, with some estimates suggesting that as many as 50,000 people lost their lives in the Portuguese capital as a result of one of the most destructive earthquakes in recorded history. While Maria and her family were largely unscathed by the earthquake, her father King José was psychologically scarred by it. In the aftermath of the disaster, he developed an extreme form of claustrophobia, one in which he feared being in walled spaces. Consequently, he moved the royal court to Ajuda, outside the city, where the court effectively met in tents for years thereafter. As she entered her mid-20s, and as it became clear that the king and queen would not produce a male heir, fresh attention was given to the issue of Maria's marriage. Typically, European royals married young in order to produce many potential heirs and preserve the royal line. It was then increasingly out of place for Maria to still be unmarried in the late 1750s. Therefore, a decision was taken at this time that Maria would marry her own uncle, the king's brother, Infante Dom Pedro. They were wed on the 6th of June 1760, when she was 25 and he was 42. Although this may seem like a very strange arrangement by today's standards, marriage amongst cousins within the European royal houses was not unusual throughout the early modern period. Also, in this particular instance, it was considered to be especially warranted, as the accession of the former king's brother as king consort, whenever Maria eventually became Queen of Portugal, would delay any reservations the Portuguese people might have about being ruled by a female monarch. Despite the significant age gap between them, Maria and Pedro's marriage was a happy one, though one blighted by a considerable tragedy. They had 7 children together, but 4 of these died in infancy, a higher than average figure at a time when child mortality was extremely high. Of the 3 that survived, 2, Prince Joseph and Infanta Mariana, died within weeks of each other, in the late autumn and early winter of 1788, both from an outbreak of smallpox. Joseph was 27 at the time, and Mariana only 19. As a consequence, only one of Maria and Pedro's 7 children lived a long life, he being Prince John, who would eventually succeed his mother as ruler of Portugal many years later. On the 24th of February 1777, King José I died. As his eldest surviving daughter, Maria now succeeded as the first Queen Regnant of Portugal, Queen Dona Maria I. Her husband became King Pedro of Portugal, but he served as king consort, meaning his role was largely ceremonial, and Maria was the true ruling monarch. Maria quickly made a major impression on the governance of Portugal. Her father's 27-year reign had been dominated by his chief minister, Sebastião José de Carvalho Melo, 1st Marquis of Pombal and 1st Count of Oreias. The Marquis was a secular politician, one who had attempted to reduce the role of the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits in the governance of the country. He had also implemented many liberal reforms aimed to bring the new ideas of the Enlightenment into the country. However, while he might be viewed as a highly progressive figure today, the Marquis had acquired many enemies by the time Maria became queen in 1777, as he was perceived as being an excessively powerful politician. Consequently, one of Maria's first actions as Queen of Portugal was to dismiss him from public office. Pombal spent the last years of his life in political exile, while Maria formed a new government, one which rejuvenated the role of the Roman Catholic Church. There were other measures taken during the first 10 years of Maria's reign which were quite successful. For instance, in 1782, the country was a central player in the formation of the League of Armed Neutrality, an agreement reached between several European states that year to resist British efforts to stop and search merchant vessels travelling to and from Europe in an effort to prevent the French from sending military and economic aid to the rebels in Britain's North American colonies, who were soon to acquire full independence as the United States of America. A year earlier, another international success was achieved when Maria's government successfully petitioned the Austrian government for possession of Delagoa Bay on the coast of what is now Mozambique. The Austrian East India Company had established a trading station here several years earlier, but the wider region was understood to be a Portuguese sphere of influence. Acquisition of Delagoa Bay through diplomatic negotiations brought a major trading station under Portuguese ownership, which yielded a large income in the trade of ivory and other commodities. While the early years of Maria's reign had been successful ones, she faced a severe personal crisis in the mid to late 1780s. On the 25th of May 1786, her husband King Pedro died. Maria took his passing badly, and in the months that followed, her mental health began to sharply decline, oscillating between periods of intense depression and mania. She also increasingly forbade cheerful festivities at the Portuguese royal court, and observers at the time described the atmosphere being one of a continual funeral around Maria. The situation deteriorated further in late 1788, when two of her surviving children, Joseph and Mariana, died from smallpox within a few weeks of each other, and just a few weeks after that her confessor, Ignacio de São Caetano, Archbishop of Salonica, also passed away. Maria was devastated by all of this, and she became increasingly erratic and oppressive in her behaviour. It's also been pointed out that her incestuous ancestry could have contributed to her mental illness, while two of her sisters had similar conditions, and her maternal grandfather, Philip V of Spain, and uncle Ferdinand VI, fell into madness at the end of their lives. As a result of her mental decline, medical assistance was sought for the Queen. The aid of Francis Willis, an esteemed physician who had treated King George III of Britain in his mental distress for years, was enlisted, but as with his charge in England, he was unable to provide effective treatment. The reality, in any case, was that Maria's condition was not as severe as George III's. The British king would eventually become completely incapacitated and spent the last 10 years of his life in an alternate reality. By way of contrast, Maria was most likely suffering from severe clinical depression as a result of the multiple tragedies which he experienced in the second half of the 1780s. Nevertheless, in 1792, a decision was taken by the Portuguese government to effectively sideline the Queen, but now her only surviving child, Prince John, played an increasingly significant role in governing the country, although Maria retained her position as Queen of Portugal. 2 years later, in 1794, the Real Barraca da Ajuda, or royal tent, burnt down. As a result, the court was moved to Queluz, where the Queen spent most of her day in the apartments. One visitor who stayed near her claimed to have heard the most agonizing shrieks that inflicted on me a sensation of horror such as I had never felt before. Maria's manic episodes not only included screams claiming to be damned and having the devil inside her, but also consisted of her attacking her servants. Strangely, she fluctuated from a state of violent excitement to being completely catatonic. Despite the failed efforts of Francis Willis, she was subjected to other treatments, such as bloodletting and enemas, but sadly these were also of no use. Maria's mental decline occurred as Portugal was beginning to be caught up in the conflicts which would ravage Europe for a quarter of a century following the French Revolution of 1789. When Maria came to the Portuguese throne, the country was a much weakened international and colonial power. In the early 16th century, Portugal had been a formidable power globally, in a fashion which far exceeded its small size and population, with territorial possessions along the coast of Africa, enclaves in India, and an empire in the East Indies. But by the 18th century, it had lost nearly all of these colonies. The exception was South America, where as a result of the Treaty of Tordesillas, a papal agreement which had divided the Americas and much of the Far East between Spain and Portugal in 1494, Portugal had ended up in control of Brazil. This enormous colony had only developed slowly in the 17th century, but by the late 18th century, it was becoming a major state in the Americas. Portuguese possession of this part of South America would become a major factor in Dona Maria's reign, as a result of the wars which began to emanate from France in the early 1790s. In 1789, a political revolution erupted in France when King Louis XVI was removed from power in Paris and Parliament took control of the country. Eventually, in the early 1790s, the French executed their king and formed a republic. As they did, the other major European powers went to war with France. The French Revolutionary Wars would last for years and eventually became the Napoleonic Wars after Napoleon Bonaparte became Emperor of France. In the course of these, Spain and Portugal were occupied by France, and this would have enormous consequences for Queen Maria. The wider European conflict had impacted on Portugal from 1801 onwards, when the Spanish, with French encouragement, began seizing some border towns in northern and eastern Portugal. But this became much worse in 1807, when Napoleon effectively decided to take more direct control of Spain and Portugal. As he did, Prince John took the decision to flee from Portugal and move the royal court to the city of Salvador de Bahia in Brazil. As they fled, Maria thought she was being kidnapped and refused to board the ship, so she was forcefully carried aboard the vessel by the fleet commander. It's claimed that she spent much of the 3-month voyage screaming, terrifying the ship's crew. By now, Maria was in her early 70s and suffering from dementia, as well as some other mental illness. She would spend the last years of her life presiding over a Portuguese royal court in exile in Brazil. These years were peculiar ones for Maria and the Portuguese nation as a whole. No sooner had they established themselves in exile in Brazil than a campaign was undertaken in Portugal by the British general Arthur Wellesley to reconquer the country from the French and then expand the conflict into Spain. The Peninsular War, as it became known, proved to be a central part of the Napoleonic Wars in the years that followed. The role of the Portuguese government in providing resources from Brazil throughout this was significant, and in 1815, Prince John decided to elevate Brazil from the status of a colony to that of a separate kingdom, in recognition of the aid it had provided to Portugal during the wars. Maria died on the 20th of March 1816 at the age of 81 at the Carmel convent in Rio de Janeiro. She was succeeded by her only surviving son, Prince John, who had ruled Portugal informally for many years, and who now officially succeeded as King John VI. To this day, there is no consensus on what mental illness afflicted Maria, yet research suggests that she likely suffered from bipolar disorder. Despite her psychological issues, Maria is well thought of today. In particular in Brazil, she is viewed as an important figure in the formation of the Brazilian state, as her reign saw the country elevated to the status of a kingdom, an important step in the eventual establishment of Brazilian independence in 1822. Thus, while she is often known as Maria the Mad today, Queen Maria I was actually a largely successful monarch in Portugal's political history. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Maria I or Maria the Mad. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. That's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.